So last time we were together, we actually read the ending part of 15. It was like, to your seed I'm giving all of this land, the land of the so-and-so, and the so-and-so, and the so-and-so. And then it says that Sarah, Abram's wife, had no child. So we ran into a problem right away in chapter 16. And I mentioned last time that chapter 16 is a bit of a train wreck. And that the wheels come off of the cart rather quickly here. So let's see what happens. In Genesis chapter 16 it says, "And Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no child. And she had a Mitzrian, or an Egyptian, female servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, Behold, Yehovah has kept me from bearing children. Please go in to my female servant. It might be that I am built up by her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her female servant, the Mitzrian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. And he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said to Abram, My wrong be upon you. I gave my female servant into your bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. Let Yehovah judge between me and between you. And Abram said to Sarai, Behold, your female servant is in your hand. Do to her what is good in your eyes. And Sarai treated her harshly, and she fled from her presence. And the messenger of Yehovah found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's female servant, where have you come from, and where are you going? And she said, I am fleeing from the presence of Sarai, my mistress. And the messenger of Yehovah said to her, Return to your mistress, and submit yourself under her hand. And the messenger of Yehovah said to her, I am going to increase your seed greatly, too numerous to be counted. And the messenger of Yehovah said to her, Behold, you are conceiving, and bearing a son, and shall call his name Yishmael, because Yehovah has heard your affliction. And he is to be a wild donkey man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and dwell over against all his brothers. And she called the name of Yehovah who had spoken to her, You are the God who sees. For she said, Even here have I seen after him who sees me. And that is why the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Yishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Yishmael to Abram. So there you have the brief story of Hagar and Sarai and Abram and Yishmael. Now, I want to start off with a couple of things that I think we should review briefly, and that is this. Do you want that or no? Okay. I want us to review briefly the promises that God has made to Abram, or to whomever. I think it we need to keep in mind who was promised what by God. Can you pull out of your memory bank just some general statements that you're aware of what God has promised and to whom? What does your memory tell you about what has been promised so far? Okay, Abraham was promised seed.
Land.
He was promised land.
Lots of kids.
Lots of kids.
Land.
And it was also that he was afflicted for so many years in Egypt.
God kind of spoke prophetically and said your seed, your offspring will be afflicted in Egypt. Or we didn't say Egypt specifically, but he said in a land that is not theirs, yeah. Keith?
No, I was just...
Oh, okay. If you want, I'm just going to give you, if you're taking notes or anything and you want to write this down, you can review Genesis chapter 11, verse 30. You can also look at Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3. Genesis 12, verse 7. Genesis 13, verse 14. 15, verse 1. 15, verses 4 and 5. And this following section that's coming up in Genesis chapter 17 is when he kind of repeats some of those things.
And also in 15, 18 is when he's talking, I don't know if you're just reiterating, but he's saying, I've given this land to your seed from the river.
Right,
the land.
right. So I'm going to ask you this. Has Sarah or Sarai been mentioned in any of these promises? Derek says no. Anybody have a different opinion about that?
Maybe not directly.
Okay.
No,
Do you think it was implied?
Yes.
Okay. Why do you think so?
I think there are some allusions that we've seen already about how important Sarah's word is. Because that word debar keeps sneaking.
I remember that, yeah. When they went down to Egypt. Sure, sure.
No, debar for that word.
Yeah, Sarah's word, right. Derek?
Also, thinking about how our name was changed also.
Mm-hmm.
It's included.
Sure. But specifically, when God has spoken to Abram, Sarai herself was never mentioned specifically. So they are assuming, I would assume, that they are assuming that the children are going to come through Sarai. But when the very first time we're introduced to Sarai, in Genesis chapter 11, just after the flood, it gives the genealogy immediately after mentioning Abram was married to Sarai. It says she was barren and had no children. And they were obviously younger then. They lived in the land of Haran for a while. They went to the land of Canaan. God says, lots of seed, going to multiply you greatly, make a great nation of you. Can you make a great nation out of somebody without giving them children?
No.
I suppose you could.
Spiritually.
Spiritually, or if even figuratively. I mean, what if Abram just became a leader of a bunch of people and they all followed in his footsteps spiritually or believed in his principles and established a kingdom for themselves, but none of them were actually his physical descendants? Yeah, right. Like an example, Moses would be an example, sure. So it is possible from the first time that God speaks to Abram that he could be interpreted as meaning, I'm going to make a great nation of you, but he doesn't mention seed in the first time that he speaks to Abram. Then you start talking about seed, and the next time, and the next time, and the next time when he talks to Abram, you start getting the idea, okay, children, seed, coming from you.
Just to kind of go back to that spiritual idea too, is that I think is ultimately, it is ultimately what that seed is. It's a spiritual seed. And it's interesting that I hadn't caught before when Messiah is speaking to those Jews or Pharisees or whoever they were. We are descendants of Abraham, and we call themselves Abraham's seed. He's like, I know you're descendants of Abraham, but if Abraham were your father,
He would
do the
do,
works of
yeah,
Abraham.
absolutely, right.
So he's saying that you would love me.
Yep, absolutely. Agreed. So I think that we just want to try to remember and put ourselves into the position that Sarai and Abram are in here when we're trying to figure out what went terribly wrong. Sarai has not ever yet been mentioned as far as the promises. So God has not told Abram, Sarai is going to have children. Now we might begin to question, well, why did they come up with this alternate plan? Well, because frankly, they're getting a little advanced in years. They're like 80, what does it say? They're 85 years old. When he was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael. And we know from next chapter that Sarai is 10 years younger than him. So she's 76 years old. That's fairly old, past the time of childbearing in this time period.
Ask me, I'll tell you.
I was going to use you for an example, but I thought that wouldn't be a good idea.
You're pregnant again, June.
No, not less Lord gave me a kid.
So I think that we want to bear in mind what these people are in turmoil here. They have promises from God of seed and children coming along, but it's not happening, and they've been waiting for a long time. And they're starting to get a little squirrely. I think that's the best word that I could come up with, is squirrely. We all tend to get squirrely.
Don't I like it?
We all tend to get a little squirrely when we don't get what we want when we want it.
That just is occurring to me. Like, I always kind of assumed in my head that that she was a part of the promises that were spoken, but it's not. And it's after
Yes.
a couple chapters that, we have the whole situation with the Lord coming, and
Right.
he was talking to her, and she said, you're going to be pregnant. She started laughing. He's like, why'd you laugh?
Right.
She's like, I don't know.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
I don't know, it's interesting. I feel like maybe realizing that, I feel like maybe, off the top of my head, maybe this is like a validation that God highly esteems, being with that one person,
Good point.
that you first.
Yeah.
come
That's a good
to.
point. Good point. I like that. And I think it also should remind us that we need to be circumspect and careful regarding arrogating or taking on promises to ourselves that may not apply. I know that's very common in a lot of people's minds when they feel like they can take anything out of the scripture and apply it to themselves, and that, I'm claiming that verse. You've heard people talk like that. You can claim whatever you want, but if it doesn't apply to you, maybe not. Now, and I'm not going to make categorical statements about what may or may not apply to you, but I am saying be careful. We need to be careful about what kind of promises we can take into our hearts. And, I think that that's a big thing. It wasn't until, I had been a nominal, quote-unquote, Christian my whole life. It wasn't until, maybe 10, 15 years ago that I really began to think, what are the promises in the Bible that are mine? And what have I just heard that maybe is not mine? That's, God made a promise to somebody at a specific time, a specific place, that is not just willy-nilly applicable to everybody. I really began to think about, what are the promises that I have? Because frankly, if you don't know what the promises are that are applied to you in your situation, even far down the road as one of Abraham's spiritual descendants as you are you valid in applying to yourself spiritual promises that were made to Abram? Do you think that's valid? I think it is. I think it totally is. If you are the seed of Abram, like Abraham, just like Paul says, if you're a person of faith and you're attached to the root of Israel, you're a spiritual seed of Abram, and you can appropriate these promises for yourself. And then you also look in the New Testament and say, what did Yeshua specifically promise? I will be with you. I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. You ask anything in my name. You kind of want to look through these things and decide what is really applicable for me, and what have I maybe had in my mind that which is not really, I can't just take that on for myself, because it can give you false hope.
Yeah.
But you really need to know what the truth is that has been promised to you, so you can hold on to true hope. That's the only thing I would say about that.
True promise comes to pass.
Right.
You can hang on to it.
If you don't know the truth, you won't know what to hold on
You can't
to.
name it and claim it.
Right, that's right.
And so, like you just said, hope, and we hear about the hope that is in you, be able to speak about what that hope is.
Right.
And Paul talks about faith being the evidence of things unseen,
Mm-hmm.
and the substance of things hoped for.
Yeah.
And the psalmist says, I hope in your word.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if we have that hope, that seed of hope, and these promises of his word in us,
Mm-hmm.
that's the seed that is unseen.
Right.
How can people see that faith? It's
Right.
only by the fruit we bear.
Sure.
It's only by our works. If you were Abraham's seed, you would do the works of Abraham.
Right.
Because you're giving evidence of the unseen hope
Right.
that is in you.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Good insight. Good insight. So just, think about that and review for yourself, maybe in your Bible study time or something, what applies to me? What are the promises? Now, the issue comes up of being patient and enduring. Being patient and enduring is never easy. These people do they strike you as patient people? Are you patient? I know I'm not. I know that Abram has demonstrated, at least on one occasion, that he maybe is not patient. I mean, when God brought him into the land of Canaan and immediately there's a famine, when he doesn't pray, he doesn't request God's instruction, he simply packs up and heads over to Egypt. God didn't tell him to go there. And we've talked about this before, but I think that would show a certain lack of patience. And I think it bears directly upon what happens here. And I'll tell you why in a moment. Also want to bring to your attention something that we can kind of get into our mind. And I don't know why, but this week as the story broke that Facebook has been engineered to be poison for your brain. Are you guys aware of this?
Yeah, I've heard that.
One of the founders of Facebook came out in an interview and said, oh, we totally built that application to play upon a reinforcement feedback loop in the human psyche so that you would become addicted to it. It actually generally, when you post things on Facebook and you get people liking and clicking your stuff and thumbs up and stuff, it gives you a dopamine hit. They studied this chemically, and they said, we built it that way, to be addictive. And this guy was saying, God knows what it is doing to the human psyche, and I fear for our children. That is now 2 of the 4 founders of Facebook who have come out and said, this thing is deadly. And you've got people writing books about how children are attached to Facebook, and it's driving them crazy. They're experiencing severe anxiety and depression, and it's really messing with their heads. And somehow I connected that with this, and I'll tell you why. Because when you are reading the Bible, you might come away with the impression that God is speaking to people and is acting in a mighty fashion all the time. He just keeps appearing to Abram, and big things keep happening in the life of Abram, but you can so easily overlook how much time has passed when nothing has happened. When they first left the land of Haran until the time that he went to Canaan, we don't know how much time had passed, but it was quite a bit. It appears to be at least 10 years that nothing has happened. Nothing. He has become very wealthy, but he has no children. His name has not yet become great. He has not been turned into a big nation or anything like that, not yet. At least 10 years have gone by. Then, Abram is 86 years old when he, has this son with Hagar. God reiterated some time ago, I'm going to give you children. Now, how much time? God appears to him again in the next chapter, chapter 17. How much time has passed? Another 13 years. When Ishmael was 13 years old is when he appeared to Abram again and said, I'm going to give you seed from Sarah. 13 years has passed. We so easily overlook that, and it can lead us to the mistaken impression that the biblical patriarchs and the people in the Bible just have these amazing spiritual plateaus happening all the time, and it can really set us up for unreasonable expectations if we don't look at, take it a little bit more critical and analytical and look at it and say, okay, wait, this person lived 175 years, and the Bible says that God appeared to him 3 times. When? When he was this old and then that old, and there's 25, 30 years in between, or 12 years, or 10 years, or 13 years. What I think we need to take away from this is patience and endurance, because we can get a mistaken impression. And you know what? Being faithful to God, to your wife, to your children, to your principles that God has taught you over the long haul, day by day, just dragging it out, day by day, getting up, putting your pants on, and going to work, treating your wife with kindness, treating your boss with honor, and with dignity, and telling the truth, not stealing staples. You got to just walk it out day by day, and you might not. These spiritual plateaus are incredibly rare. I mean, how many spiritual plateaus? Aunt June, you are what, 70-something years old? How many spiritual plateaus you had in your life?
I'm only 60. No, I'm 75. So who cares?
How many spiritual plateaus have you had in your life?
Plenty.
Good for you.
Lots.
Good for you.
Lots.
Now, I'm 46 years old, and I would say that there have been, I could probably count them on one hand. I probably wouldn't even need all my 5 fingers to say, God was moving in my life. You know what I'm saying? Something special. I could probably count them on one hand. Now, you might look at me like, really? That's sad for you.
No,
And I don't know what your experience is, but I do know that, high spiritual plateaus, and maybe I have a different idea in my mind about what a high spiritual plateau is. You might think, I was reading my Bible one day and I got this really cool insight. You might consider that a high spiritual plateau. I would not. I would say, no, I'm not talking about something special. But, everybody's got their own opinion about that. But I am saying this is about humdrum living for the most part, and we have to be patient and endure. And in this situation, patience and endurance is so critical, because Sarai makes a huge mistake. But I'm not going to try to vindicate Sarai, but what I am going to point out to you is a couple of important details which I think that might make a little bit of sense, a little bit of difference, okay? So the first thing that I want to just bring to your attention, and you can make a note to yourself regarding this. Some interesting things occur when you compare and contrast the 3 biblical matriarchs, Sarai and Rebekah, and Jacob's favorite wife, what's her name? Rachel. Do you notice any similarities between these 3 ladies? Barren. They were all having trouble conceiving. Okay, so there's that, which is kind of interesting. All 3 died prematurely. Never saw their children, never saw their grandchildren. Didn't last very long. Interesting little take on that. And interestingly enough, all 3 pulled a switcheroo. How did Sarai pull a switcheroo? Well, it's right here in this. It's right here in this section. She's going to switch herself out for Hagar. What about Rebekah?
She did the thing with the goats.
Yeah, she tried to switch out her one son with another son.
She cooked up the goats.
That's right. And what about Rachel? She switched out. She says, I can't have any children. I'm going to switch out Bilhah. Or Zilpah. I don't remember which one it was. It was like, maybe she'll have children for me. So it's interesting, the similarities between these 3 ladies. And we might discuss that a little bit further, but just put that in your pipe and smoke it later. Now, also something to put into your pipe. You have 3 times where and I've highlighted or underlined, certain key phrases in this passage, which we'll talk about a little bit at a time. Number 1, it might be that I am built up by her. What does that strike you as? What does she mean there? Couldn't she have said, it could be that I will have children by her, or something like that? Do you notice something? It just seems odd to me when she says, I might be built up by her. Does that seem like an appropriate statement, Derek?
I'm wondering if that could be referring to her, the disdain that she had when she felt that she was being looked at in contempt.
Sure. Well, that hasn't happened yet.
It just sounds like maybe she had this expectation.
Okay.
That, I'm not sure if it was misplaced or...
Okay.
She should have already had kids. Is that right?
I'm not sure exactly.
Some have suggested that regarding this is that she's feeling really down. I mean, she's 85 years old. You know how important children are in this day and age. She's feeling shamed and worthless as a wife, even though obviously Abram loves her tremendously. So we got, it could be that she's feeling really bad about herself. I can totally see that. Tracy?
This is that same word, built up, that we saw in Genesis 2:22, when he took man from the side and built a woman. So I think, just from what I'm seeing here, is maybe she's referring to building the house, and we know, like what I'm sure you're going to get to later, is about Galatians 4 connecting Hagar and Sarah to these huge, the physical Jerusalem and the spiritual Jerusalem being built up. So.
Yeah.
And that we
Well,
this house being
and
built
what's
as well.
curious about this statement to me is that she doesn't relate this to maybe our house will be built up, or my husband will be built up, or the legacy will be built up. She's saying I will be built up.
That's interesting because she is the mother of us all and called New Jerusalem.
Right.
Which is spirit.
Right.
So that is interesting.
That is interesting. I just thought it was a curious phrase, and I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, but I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. My impression is that it's not a good thing, that she is somehow needing to vindicate herself and is losing her patience.
Well, she got mad at him, she got mad at her husband.
Yeah.
You know, that showed madness, got mad at her because she messed up and told her to go with her husband when she's stupid.
Well, that's a tricky thing.
And something that you said clicked too, with all them being barren, I think is associated with faith and lack of.
Yeah.
Because being barren means you're unable to bear fruit.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we are unable to bear fruit, how can we have faith?
Right. Yeah.
And so we see that in her
Right.
by not trusting in the spirit and that word and relying on the flesh. And
Right.
it's interesting because Hagar and Ishmael both represent the flesh here, and this choice that's being made,
Right.
and the promise representing spirit, which is through Sarah and Isaac.
Right.
And I was looking at the name Hagar because it doesn't really tell you what it means. in
We're going
the
to talk
Psalms.
about that in a sec. Yeah,
Okay.
that's an interesting thing right there for sure. There's a lot there, I think. Well, I appreciate you bringing that out because I think when you look at the other two matriarchs, Rachel and Rebecca, when they discover that they're barren or they can't have children or something, there's prayer involved in both cases. In this case, there's not. There's not any prayer. There's a plan to try to, what are we doing here? Something's wrong. We got to fix this.
With Hannah, Samuel's mother.
Yeah.
She was barren.
Right.
She prayed and cried and prayed and cried.
Right.
And she got
That's right.
Samuel, and his name was Samuel, God will hear.
Yeah.
And that's, so
Yeah.
now we're kind of like trying to duplicate that maybe? Ishmael,
I know.
God shall hear?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? So I think that I'm built up by her, to me, does not serve a positive connotation. I could be wrong. You can look at that a different way, and if you want to, that's totally cool. Yeah. And you know what's interesting, too, is that right next to that, we have Abram listen to the voice of Sarai. Where have we heard that phrase before?
Garden.
In the garden. Because you listen to the voice.
Why?
That was Adam and Eve when he said he got busted by God, saying, because you listen to the voice. Now, what's interesting is that it's the same phrase. And then, but that phrase will repeat itself a third time in just a little while, and also in relation to Hagar. When she's, Hagar, and there's the circumcision ceremony for when Isaac is born. And Ishmael is poking fun somehow, and Sarai stands up again and says, get these people out of here. The son will not inherit with my child. And then God actually speaks up and says, listen to the voice of your wife. It's okay, do what your wife says. But in these other two cases, it's you listen to the voice of your wife and it's not a good thing. I don't know, it's kind of weird. So, wanted to bring that to your attention also. Now, in regards to this plan of action that Sarai actually comes up with, I want to bring out a couple of things. First of all, Sarai is probably feeling really, really bad about herself. And she is not, in her own mind, and possibly in the mind of everyone around her, and maybe even creeping into the mind of Abram, this woman is not fulfilling her responsibilities as a wife somehow. I mean, it's certainly not up to her. It's not, she's not the one that's preventing herself from being able to bear. But you can see that perhaps we have two options here. If they're looking at these promises of God, saying he's going to give us seed like the sand of the seashore and like the stars of the sky, we got two options here. It's either going to happen through Sarah or it's not. God can work two ways. Sarah, he did not mean Sarah, and Sarah's going to die, and then he's going to get another wife, and she's going to be the one. That's certainly a possibility, because again, Sarah was not mentioned specifically. Now, which would be the more majestic, the more powerful and spiritually powerful of those two options?
Well, he was married to Sarah, he wasn't married to Hagar.
That's right. Well, and multiple marriage in these days is nothing. So it's really no big deal, according to the times, that Sarai would say, here's my handmaid. In fact, if you look at the legal codes of the day, you know that the Torah hasn't been given yet in its full and complete written form. We know that Abram is obviously following the word, and the word Torah is used in relation to when God speaks to his son and says, "Your father kept my commandments and my Torah and my command and my mitzvot." So he knew something about the Torah, but it's not fully delineated yet. But you've heard of the Code of Hammurabi? Some of you might have, I'm not sure. The Code of Hammurabi is a law code. It is the first codified set of laws in human existence that were actually written down. Now, these are not biblical. They were put into place in Babylon. Hammurabi was some king who was in the land of Babylon at some point, but it was dated to prior to Abraham, and it was found chiseled on big, huge stones in that area. And a lot of it is righteous rulings, strangely enough. There is some weird stuff, like a thief getting caught and getting his hand chopped off and stuff, but, you expect that for those days. It's a little barbaric. But, one of and these were well known throughout the ancient world, they were still talking about them at the time of the Greeks. Hammurabi published the first law codes all throughout the Fertile Crescent, and they posted these things on giant pillars, and they still have these in existence today, the very first human law codes. And in there, what's interesting is that you can see that it actually speaks about this situation. If a man has a wife, and it's interesting because it says specifically, if a man has a wife and after 10 years she has not given him a child, he may divorce her, or he may take another wife, or interestingly, she may provide him a handmaid. It's interesting stuff. Don't know how applicable it is in this case, but I just think it's kind of interesting that in his day, common law codes of the time would say that it's no big deal to have multiple wives. We know it's very common in biblical times. That's obviously not the best idea, and I don't think that was the original plan, but it happened. And apparently, it would have been, according to the rules of law in the days that they lived in, it would have been quite common for, if she couldn't give a birth to a child, that you give a handmaid to him, or he can divorce. He certainly would have been within his legal rights, of course, at those times to do that. But I think he loved Sarah tremendously, and he wouldn't ever want to divorce her. But he certainly acceded to her suggestion that you can go into my handmaid. So it's fairly common in those days.
And they used to think the more kids you have, the more blessed you are.
Sure.
If you didn't, you weren't blessed, and why weren't you? Maybe
Right.
you were cursed or God did something to
Sure.
you.
Sure.
So having children was very, very, probably one of the most important things. that you
Yeah,
have.
absolutely. Absolutely. And it's kind of funny, the rabbis have talked about this in regards to how the biblical matriarchs did not have children. They kind of speak for God and say, well, God says you're absolutely beautiful women and you're filthy rich and wealthy. If I gave you children also, I'd never hear from you.
Yes.
So they propose, you're gorgeous and you have lots of money, but I'm going to withhold children from you so that you'll pray to me because I want to hear from you. If I gave you everything, you would never come to me. And believe me, I know how that is. You get to. There's not for no reason that in the book of Deuteronomy it says, when you have grown fat and you've gotten all these good things and you forget the Lord your God, believe me, that is a very real thing that happens to all of us when things go in our way and everything seems to be falling into place. We can very easily forget about God. And it's, difficulty and challenges remind us that we need to call out to Him. I think that's one of the key points of trial, difficulty, tribulation.
It's also cool because today when I was digging in my papers looking for something, I remember when we got this house over here, actually the Lord got the house for us. After the Lord blessed us with all that stuff, I wrote a thank you note to the Lord, which I think is really good when God does something. Tammy does that too. You write it down because He blesses us so much you don't even realize it. And I mean, I had 4 pages of just God's blessing, getting us the house. We didn't have the money. And all the family and the relatives that gave us money and to get into the house and everything like that. And then we didn't have food, and how God provided everything. I mean, down to your socks and your underwear. I mean, and
That's true.
Then I said, wow, God.
Yeah.
I mean, how much 4 pages of, just blessings just to get in that house and provide the food, the furniture. It just went on and on and on.
Yeah,
wow.
absolutely.
And I said, wow, I think we need to write more down of what God does. I used to complain and the Lord say, okay, make me a list here. All the things that you think you don't have and you're just complaining write them all down, put them all right here.
Yeah.
For the past month. Okay, so I put them down and then He said, now I want you to sit there and be quiet. I want you to think how much I've blessed you in just 1 month. That's all I'm asking, just 1 month. How much you've been blessed. And I'm sitting there thinking, and then before you know it, wow. Like somebody buys you a Coke, somebody gives you a hamburger, somebody does this, or somebody, just so many things you don't even see as blessings.
Sure.
So it's good for us to write things down. And I was reading it, I go, oh Lord, I gotta write you again.
I think that's a great idea. Some people keep a prayer journal. The things that they're praying about.
Yeah.
You can kind of look back
Tammy
on it
does
and
that.
see the way. I keep a journal as well. I think it's a great
So when
idea.
God blesses you and takes care of that prayer,
Right.
and then you reread because you already forget all that stuff.
It's
like,
very easy to forget.
Oh God,
Yeah.
I'm so ungrateful.
We can be very ungrateful, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's good to be reminded. Absolutely. Good point.
I'm glad I read that today.
Oh, believe me. So I'm just going to go through a couple of these things here. An interesting thing in verse 5, right at the end of verse 5, where it's, she starts getting really upset and saying, the violence, if the word Hamas is in there, the violence done to me be upon you.
Yeah.
And I gave this chick to you, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. Let Jehovah judge between me and between you. You know that the Hebrew, if you look in your transliteration there, it actually has the word between twice with the prefix that indicates between me, and then a prefix and a suffix that indicates between you. That's how they say it in Hebrew, between you and between me, or between me and between you. What's interesting about this is when you look at the Hebrew in this section right here, it actually says between me and between you, and the between you is the female form. What does that indicate to you? When she's talking to apparently Abram, but then when she says, let Jehovah judge between me and between you, the you is feminine. I think it's possible that Hagar was in the room and that she addressed that statement to Hagar and not to Abram. She's saying, the Lord judge between me and between you. She was talking to Hagar.
I kind of thought the same thing.
It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Makes you wonder what she was talking. Now, why does she say, now this appears to be, now that you over there, the wrong done to me, or the evil, the violence done to me be upon you, that's male. She appears to be talking to Abram here. how is it possible that what has come upon me, the evil that has come upon me, be upon you? What is she talking about? It's your fault. I think you might better interpret this. Why does she say to him, it's your fault? You are the problem here.
Because he was stupid and listened for it.
I mean, you think that he would have said, yeah, but, that actually occurred to me, that he could have very easily said, no, wait a minute here, woman, this was your idea. Or that it had something to do with a husband or a father having the right to annul vows or have some type of spiritual authority, and maybe he should have stood up and said, woman, that's not a great idea. Let's hold back and have faith. But maybe she's blaming him for that. Why didn't you stop me? I was being stupid. That occurred to me. And that may still be a valid point. I don't know. But another thing occurred to me as well. And this brings me back to what we had discussed previously on several occasions about the wife being a reflection of the husband. What I think is potentially going on here is that she is literally laying blame at his feet, and rightly so, because Abram had demonstrated this behavior to her in the past. When he decided we're going down to Egypt to escape this difficulty, he was looking for a way of escape out of the difficulty and came up with an alternate plan. We're going down to Egypt. We know what came out of that. Nothing good. Plague came upon Pharaoh's house. He ended up with a bunch of stuff. He got a bunch of riches, but he also came away with this female servant that's going to cause so much trouble later. Of course, when he was overcome with fear and thought he was going to get killed, he had to come up with another alternate plan. I'm going to tell him that you're my sister. So I think that he has modeled this behavior for her, in a sense. Now, I know you may be looking at me like, dude, that's not nice to say about Abram.
True.
But it is true to an extent. At least I think so. Mike disagrees with me, but that's okay. Angela?
I thought maybe she was saying, when she said, may the wrong done to me be upon you, and then she describes what this thing has hurt her, that it might be a way of saying, feel my pain.
Feel my pain.
I think she's in a lot of pain right here. I mean, more than even before. Because now not only she's shamed, childless, but now she's been humiliated because.
Yeah.
And maybe she feels like he's not feeling.
Hey, you bring up an amazing point that is a curious thing about the female species, which is that I have discovered, after being with my lovely and gracious wife for 27 years, that when your wife is complaining, there's nothing you can say. You don't try to fix it. That would be the wrong move. You just listen and you nod and you say, I feel your pain. That sucks. And you ask maybe, what can I do? But you don't offer suggestions. She doesn't want that. she just wants to know that you care. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think that and I'm applying that to this.
The suggestions to fix, I think, sometimes come across as, let me tell you what you could have done better.
Yeah.
Instead of just empathizing.
Yes.
Instead of empathy, it's like, let me fix what you messed up.
Yes.
That's what men do. We suggest, hey, did you try this? Did you do?
Yeah, we make a bunch of suggestions. Yeah, empathy is the key. Not making suggestions about how you could have done it better, or how you should have done this, or how you still can do this. That doesn't help, in my experience. The most important thing is to just have some empathy and say, yeah, wow, that's.
All you men, let you hear what the voice of the Lord is telling you today. I'm not married, I don't care. They are.
So therefore, you're not biased, huh? That's funny. So no, I would say that's a good insight, Angela. But people have puzzled over this, and I've come up with, like I said, like I've just talked about, two possible ideas. You can take them or leave them however you like, but I'm convinced that maybe it's a little bit of both, you know. Maybe he could have tried to say, hey, whoa, that's not a great idea, or maybe he's actually bears some responsibility for, you know, acceding to it or leading by example in the wrong way.
You sure ran for it, just like that.
Well, he didn't object too much, apparently. That's, you know.
I'd have a couple of skillets for you.
So, now I want to briefly, you can see an interesting thing regarding, and this was kind of interesting because Tracy talked about this when we were doing the, that was Yom HaKippurim, regarding the word anah. And the word anah appears here a couple of 2 or 3 times in this section. And one thing that I discovered that was kind of interesting this week is that I found 5 different meanings for the word anah. And they're all very, very instructive. Harshly. Sarai treated her harshly. That's the word anah. Now, when the messenger of Yehovah finds Hagar in the wilderness and says to her, return to your mistress and submit, that is also the word anah. Now, what's interesting is, like I said, there's 5 different meanings that I could find in the Bible that use the word anah. And that is the word that we most often talk about, like we did on Yom HaKippurim, is like, you shall afflict your souls. That's the word anah. Okay? Now, what's interesting here is that Sarai treated Hagar harshly. And then Hagar is told to return and submit. Then if you look at these 5 different occurrences, I'm just going to read to you these 5 different ways that this word is translated, and you let me know what you think regarding this word, and maybe some type of spiritual application. And it's also interesting the order in which they appear in the Bible. Okay? The first way that it is transmitted and interpreted is afflict. Anah is afflict. The second is humble. The third is submit. The fourth way that his word is translated is answered. And answered. And the 5th way is sing. Sing. Like sing for joy. That's anah. Afflict, humble, submit, answered, sing. What does that remind you of?
The process of the word does.
It totally does. It reminds me, every one of those ways that word can be translated, in that order in which they appear, it seems like a spiritual process. You are afflicted, you humble yourself and submit, or you are humbled and then you submit. Somewhere in here, there's a decision process. Either at humble yourself or submit, one or the other. Either you're humbled because of affliction and you submit yourself, or you are afflicted, you humble yourself, you submit, your prayer is maybe answered, and then you sing for joy. I don't know. It's just an interesting way of looking. And you know what's interesting is when you go and you look at this word, let's say you just click into your Bible right now on your electronic version, you say, I see anah translated in all these different ways, but I don't see answered and sing. Well, it's interesting because if you go to the word answered or sing in your Bible and you just do a word search on that, it's the same word. But for whatever reason, the Strong's Concordance was not connecting them. It's exactly the same word, spelled exactly the same way, pronounced the exact same way. And yet they're not connected in the Strong's lexicon.
But they have different meanings.
Different meanings. Translated as humble, afflict, submit, answered, and sing. And I think that there is a spiritual principle here, unfortunately, as well. Do you know that the very first time that the word anah is used is right in the previous chapter that we just studied? Do you remember what it was? And somebody just mentioned it a little bit ago. Your descendants will be afflicted in a land that is not theirs for 400 years. That was the very first time that the word anah was used. And now we know about the rule of first mention, right? It's important. It's a spiritual importance. So if the very first time that the word anah is used and it says your seed shall be humbled and afflicted in a land that is not theirs for 400 years, and then the very next time we see the word anah used, it is Sarai treating Hagar harshly. And then we bring in what Hagar stands for. You look that word up in your lexicon or whatever, and you see that the best they can come up with is flee. But what if, and the rabbis have speculated about this, and I think it's kind of interesting, what if this is your Strong's Concordance or your Brown's Driver Briggs will tell you it could mean flee. It seems to be of some foreign origin. I'm not exactly sure how to translate Hagar. But what if it is actually a Hebrew word? It's a contraction. Hagar. Hagar. Not Hagar, but Hagar. That's exactly how it's spelled in Hebrew. What is a ger? A stranger, a sojourner. So Hagar's name could accurately be translated as the sojourner. And everything about her life is like a vagrant, a vagabond, a wanderer, you know. She's fleeing into the wilderness, she's running around, almost dies out there, heads back to Egypt, you know. She is a stranger. And they get that, the rabbis do, because of Moses' son, Gershom. A stranger there because he fled to the land of Midian and met his wife Zipporah and had a child and named him Gershom or Gershom. I was a stranger there. Shom is there and Ger is stranger or sojourner. So do you potentially see any spiritual significance in this word anah showing up between about the Hebrews being enslaved in a country that is not theirs, where they will be sojourners in this land and treated poorly for 400 years, and then the very next thing you see is Hagar being treated poorly by Sarai? I think that it is significant. Unfortunately, I think, and you know what else I want to point out to you is, what did Hagar do wrong in this situation?
Despised her mistress.
She became haughty and lifted up in her own eyes. She lorded it over her. When she's probably a young lady, she's not probably terribly old. The rabbis actually have, for whatever reason, suggested that Hagar is actually an Egyptian princess. It's not any old, just lowly female slave that they gave to Abram, but it's actually one of Pharaoh's daughters. I don't know where they got that, but there you go. Angela?
Is it wrong to look at this as the Egyptian thing looks like karma?
It certainly does to me. It certainly
Just like
suggests that.
When Jacob pulled the switcheroo with his brother and then his
Uncle Laban,
switcheroo on him.
Uncle Laban did the same
like-
thing.
Is this the Sarah Hagar thing coming back to bite them, where you treated the Egyptian harshly and now your descendants will be treated harshly by the Egyptians?
I certainly see that. It seems out of proportion to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, whoa, wait a minute. We treated this one Egyptian chick bad for a little while, and you're going to enslave my descendants for 400 years, and now we you know, it seems disproportionate. But the rabbis and other commentators have made quite a list of transgressions and sins and troubles that the patriarchs brought upon themselves. And you can clearly see it. I mean, the Bible's not about hiding the flaws of the patriarchs. We got Abram, going down to Egypt when he maybe shouldn't have, lying about it. His wife. You've got Isaac. That's the only one which is kind of unusual, because I don't find anything that Isaac does wrong in the text of the Bible. There's not a lot of space dedicated to him. He's a bit of a mysterious figure, but there's almost very little information about him at all. He dwells in the land. He never leaves it. And you don't get anything, really much detail about him at all. But Jacob, he's bumbling all over the place. He's screwing up all kinds of stuff. He's tricking his dad. He's trying to make a bargain with God. It's a little strange. So
Isaac does the switcheroo too, though, right?
Isaac does?
With saying his wife is his sister.
Yes, Isaac does say his wife is his sister. Now that doesn't seem like a huge one to me, but whatever. Tracy.
I just wanted to kind of ask that you entertain this thought.
I will entertain.
When you read through this and think of Hagar as the flesh and Sarah as the spirit, as we talked about, what Paul talks about.
Yep.
And some interesting things that are going on, like in verse 4, when Hagar saw that she conceived, isn't that similar to saying, and she saw the fruit? Just like Eve. You're kind of comparing that to
Yeah.
she saw and then she partook. And then it says, and her mistress was despised in her eyes. So when you disobey God, he says, you hated my word, you despised my word. So
Yeah.
if you fall after your eyes, the flesh, and despise the word, and then I think it's interesting that Sarah afflicts her and she fled, and that reminds me of resist the devil and he will flee from you. And the flesh is always tested in the wilderness. And that's where she's sent. That's where Messiah went. That's where the Israelites were.
Yeah.
The flesh is being tested there.
Sure.
And so he says, I'm not making any comments on Hagar as a person, I'm just saying spiritually speaking.
Sure.
So Sarah, let's say, picture this as your spirit and your flesh. Deal harshly, afflict your flesh, and your flesh should submit to you, should submit to the spirit within you. Right. That's really ultimately what we're supposed to be doing in our walk.
Yeah.
And how Romans 8:7 talks about the flesh is not subject to the law of God because it cannot be, so it cannot please God.
Right.
And we are children of the Spirit, we must walk in the Spirit. So there's just some really interesting parallels to
Absolutely.
flesh and spirit.
Absolutely. And I would even go not a step further necessarily, but add that when you first hear about God making a promise to Abram regarding seed, and I think we've mentioned this before, but it's taking on new significance to me in my mind, is that he refers to them as dust of the earth. But in the second case, it's stars in the sky. Okay.
You are from below, I am from above.
Right.
Messiah tells those people who said they were descendants of
Yes.
Abraham.
Yes.
I am from above.
So I think that it's possible that we could look at it in this way. You could say, well, Abram had a lot of children. I mean, Hagar had 12 sons who became princes, okay? And then after Sarah died, he married Keturah and had a whole boatload of other children, okay? Are those the dust? Are these children who were born not of Sarai the dust? The children of dust? And the offspring of Sarah is the stars of the heavens? To look at it in a spiritual way, I don't know that God was just using a flowery figure of speech saying your children are going to be like the dust of the earth, just, numerable. And then again, when he reiterates it, it's your children are going to be as the stars of the sky. It makes me think that it's not just flowery language, that there's spiritual connotation there. And that not only will the children of Hagar and Keturah be counted as the dust of the earth, fleshly creatures who are not spiritually discerning and not connected with Abram spiritually, but also can be used of some of his physical descendants from Sarai who are also fleshly and are not connected to Abraham in a spiritual sense. So that you can say some of Abram's offspring are like dust, others are like the stars.
What does that mean, like some of the dust? weren't really that godly, and some of the stars were more.
I think you
godly.
could talk about like just like Tracy was saying a moment ago. You are from your father, below. I'm from above. You are from below. You're from your father, the devil. So many of the Jews in Yeshua's day would be considered children of the dust. They were not of the seed of the spiritual seed of Abram. They were of the seed of the flesh, and this would be a good time to bring up perhaps Galatians chapter 3 or 4 or Romans chapter 5 through 7. Do you have any comments that you'd like to make in regard to that? I know that we're running a little bit low on time,
I just want
but
to
yeah,
add to what you and Tracy were saying.
Please.
The picture becomes real clear about Hagar representing the flesh and Sarah representing the spirit, but also the word. So like we've seen, there's 3 different places in this story where that word debar is connected to Sarah and it's not translated.
right.
And in Proverbs 1:8, and it says, "Hear the instruction to your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother." Proverbs 23, "Listen to your father who begot you, and do not despise your mother when she is old." Right. So you got this picture of Sarah, this older person who is this representation of the word. And I think that just kind of really ties into when we're talking about submitting the flesh to that word.
Yeah.
What?
In Proverbs 6:23 that the commandment of the lamp, the Torah is a light. Reproofs of destruction are a way of life. Keep you from the strange woman.
Hagar being the strange woman. Hagar being the strange woman, perhaps.
It's not the same word, but
Sure,
it's still,
sure.
there's that, it's a foreign woman.
That's a stranger,
That's what that word
sojourner. Yeah, it's. I mean, you could link them in some way. Maybe not directly in a Hebrew word, but certainly thematically. Yeah, absolutely.
And then we see that picture with Joseph when he's in Egypt and the strange woman trying to get at him.
Right.
He knows God. He goes with God's word.
Right.
He trusts in God. I
Right.
saw that faith being shown.
Yeah, absolutely. I have just one other thing that I'd like to briefly bring out here, and this is regarding Ishmael himself. It says, and this is a difficult subject here. It's when the angel of the Lord begins to speak to her, he says he is to be a wild donkey of a man. The way that the Hebrew is constructed there, it actually seems to say this is not going to be a wild man. This is a donkey, a wild donkey in the shape of a man. He has the nature and the spirit of a wild donkey, but he is in the shape of a man. Meaning untamed of spirit, untamed and untamable of spirit. And he dwells over against all his brothers, and everyone's hand against him, and his hand against everyone. This is a really combative and wild type of a man. And I think, unfortunately, you can see that in the history. You know who we're talking about, who these people became, right? These are the Arab peoples who are over up against, they are the propagators of Alawitism, the extreme forms of Islam, which are responsible for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They're dwelling right there in the neighborhood of all of their brothers, and they are over and against all of their brothers. In fact, that conflict between the brothers is starting to rise up again. If you've been looking at the news at all lately, you've got more tensions right now between Saudi Arabia and some of their other Arab neighbors. They're fighting against each other, over against all of his brothers, literally again in the Hebrew, over in the face of. So you've got a lot of trouble going on there, and he's a wild donkey of a man, a wild donkey in the shape of a man. It's just kind of interesting, unfortunately, and I don't want to mischaracterize it, but I don't know how you could. And their religion that they have adopted is certainly not helping matters. Tracy.
I don't know what the connection is, but here's another word play, because that word for running wild, or translating as wild donkey, is parade, and it's the same letters as para, which means to bear fruit.
Mm.
So there could be like this, this beast versus,
They're
man.
definitely bearing fruit.
Huh?
They're definitely bearing fruit. Is that what you mean?
What kind of?
What kind? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of fruit there, but it's just not good fruit.
The same exact letters as para.
Yeah, interesting. Reminds me of puree, if you want to remember the Hebrew word in that way. So there's so much more. I really was kind of startled as I began to read this rather short section of text that is just loaded with so much spiritual significance. And it's not for no reason, apparently, that all these New Testament authors felt like, waxing eloquent about this section here. It's really, really important. So that's pretty much all I have for that section, but there's still much more, yeah.
One more question. I'll try to do it quick because I smell delicious. But what the angel says,
Yes.
in a way, it starts out positive. I will give you many, many sons.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, the same way, as many as you can count. You cannot even count them.
Sure.
But then, it is almost like a curse.
Mm.
So, I wonder from how she saw that, how Hagar saw it, and how it is meant. It is almost, okay, an angel comes down from, hey, congratulations, you're pregnant.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. But you're cursed in a way, or your son will be cursed for indefinite time. You still struggle with it.
Yeah.
How do you see that? Because when I read it, I got confused about it.
Yeah, you might think that she would be listening to this going, this is not good at all,
Abortion.
Yeah, seriously. But this happens several times in the Bible when blessings or curses are spoken over children, especially in the relation to the family of Jacob. When he's dying and he's talking about what's going to happen to his sons in the future. When Moses is dying and he's talking about what's going to happen to the children of Israel in the future. They don't mince words. They say some pretty rough stuff. And when Esau comes and says, a blessing for me, my father, where's my blessing? He's like, I got nothing for you. You're going to eat the dust of the earth. Your brother's going to rule over you, but you'll kick off his fetters once you've got enough of him. It's not good. And yeah, you think that Hagar might have said that this is not good. But when you were talking about it, I was imagining in my mind that at this point, she's probably feeling not only hurt and rejected, but maybe defiant and angry and rebellious. And words like this might have actually appealed to her. It just occurred to me. It just struck me that way.
But when you go before the Lord and you make up what you think God is telling you to do and not really listen to what He's really telling you, then it's when you really have problems. And
Yeah.
more or less you are cursed.
Right. So it just occurred to me that she might have interpreted this in a positive light due to her own maybe unspiritual condition, and that she's just been mistreated by these people. She might be saying, yeah, my son's going to stick it to you. Reminds me of like Saul, saying, I'm going to give David my son Michal. She'll be a snare to him. Ulterior motives. So I don't know. It's a good question, though. I just had in my mind that maybe she would have reveled in this and said, yeah, he's going to be a wild donkey of a man, and in all of his brothers, he's going to beat him up. I don't know. Anyway, good question, though.
You kick me out.
Yeah, that's what you get for kicking me out. Anyway, let's thank you so much for your good insights, you guys, and we'll pick it up again next week. It gets even better. It keeps getting better. Good sharing tonight.